Alright, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 5 of Isaiah for Mormons. You may notice the background of the title Isaiah for Mormons and also the script of the of Isaiah itself. The background is actually a screenshot from the Dead Sea Scrolls. They have a copy of that on the internet, actually, of the entire Isaiah scroll. So I just took a good part of it and just took a picture of it and put it here. It's in the public domain, so I just thought, might as well. As you can actually see what it actually looks like. So that's kind of interesting. Besides the Book of Mormon, the Dead Sea Scrolls version is actually the oldest that we have, with maybe the exception of the Greek translation of Isaiah called the Septuagint. But regardless, the Book of Mormon is the oldest, and so when we encounter it in the Book of Mormon, that's what I'm going to use. We'll talk about some ways of how scholars determine how texts are older, and actually show from the Book of Mormon that surprisingly that checks out in some cases. So we'll get to that today. I created, if you don't like having the videos where you can read along and then listen at the same time, I've also created a podcast version of this, so you can just download it and put it on your MP3 player while maybe you're driving to work or whatever. It's just Isaiah for Mormons, the same thing, just search in quotation marks, and it's on archive.org, so you can just search Isaiah for Mormons in quotes and then archive.org, and it should get it to you. So then you can just download it as an MP3 file, put it on your iPod or whatever, and just take it with you if you don't have time to sit down with it, and a lot of us don't have time, right? So anyway, chapter 5 of Isaiah for Mormons. So let's just talk a little bit about this again. Like I said, sometimes chapter divisions are a little bit arbitrary, and so there probably shouldn't be a chapter division here. It's actually difficult to tell in the King James Version. The only reason we know that this chapter is supposed to tie to the last chapter is the Book of Mormon. When you look at the King James Version of chapter 5, it starts off very abruptly. And in chapter 4, it's talking about this sort of eschatological temple, how everybody in every place is going to be like a temple because the bad people are going to be gone and the good people are going to be left, and all of Jerusalem is going to be kind of like this temple, and it's going to be a protection to people. And then it says, "Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard." And you go, wait, what? What does that have to do with anything, right? But the Book of Mormon actually explains, no, this is not totally out of the blue. It does there is continuity. It says, "Then will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard." So, and then will I sing to my well-beloved. So this is supposed to tie back to the last chapter. And when you look at the allegory in Jacob 5, you can tell that actually, yes, this probably does tie to that, and therefore to the last material. This is not exactly the same because he's talking about grapes here, not olives, but the word actually for vineyard is the same in Hebrew. It can refer to olive trees or grapevines, and I think the ideas are supposed to tie together, and in fact a lot of the language ties together. So I think that's important to notice that the Book of Mormon really does clear up a lot of stuff here, and kind of ties it together, because you can imagine sometimes they're not going to tie together. Sometimes it's just a series of sermons. One kind of goes right after the other. Yeah, they'll kind of be tied together, but it's something like trying to collect the works of Joseph Smith all together into one book, which we've done. But obviously that's going to be a little bit choppy, right? And even the Gospels are very unified, but you'll notice that it hops back and forth between sermons and stories, and it's unified because an editor has come through and helped to tie everything together, right? The guys writing the Gospels have helped to tie it all together. And people have done that here. Some cases may be better than others. Like I said, it's a difficult project. But here, it's very clear from the Book of Mormon, no, there is supposed to be continuity here between chapter 4 and chapter 5. So it says, this is verse 1 of chapter 5. Then will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. In the King James, it's just, Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. It's completely, seems to be completely disconnected from chapter 4, but here, no, clearly it's connected. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill, and he fenced it, and gathered out the stones thereof, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a tower in the midst of it, and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, it brought forth wild grapes. So here we can see that, like I said, there was continuity. Back in chapter 4, everything was ruined. Only a small group is left, and they are the good people that have been left behind. And all of those people have become holy to the Lord. Well, you remember in Jacob 5, with the allegory of the vineyard there, that's a similar situation, that we have a whole bunch of, originally all the plants are good, everything's going great, but then things start to go bad, and the Lord of the vineyard tries to graft some things in to see if it works, and it works for a while, but then it doesn't work, and the Lord of the vineyard says, well, I'm just going to scrap it and just call it a day. And then all the other people are like, well, maybe we'll just try a little bit more to make it work out, and the Lord of the vineyard says, okay, we'll try to make it work out. And of course, eventually it does work out, but then in the end he says, okay, this is the last time we're going to harvest, and then we're going to burn the place down, right? And so I think that we have something here. Things have gone pretty bad as far as Israel and Judah are concerned, and God's thinking, I've done all this great stuff for this vineyard, and then when I wanted it to bring forth good grapes, it brought forth wild grapes. So I'm just going to torch the place, right? And he talks about that later. So that's kind of what we're dealing with here. Very, very similar to what we're going to get in Jacob 5. And it helps to tie it together to the last chapter. It's a similar concept. So he says, my well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. You have to understand that at the time, real estate is very, very precious, agricultural real estate specifically. So a lot of the Middle East is sort of hills and valleys with small streams down in the very middle of the valley. So down in the valley, you'll have streams. Then right on the banks of the streams, in the sort of floodplain area, you'll have grain production, because that's where the soil is really, really good, because it's been bringing in silt from the streams and flooding it. Then as you go up the hill, the land becomes less productive. So what you grow there is you grow vineyards, which is to say olive trees and grapevines. And it's terribly, terribly rocky. You have to pull out all the stones and stuff like that. And it's a real pain, but you can grow good things there if you're willing to take the effort. Then as you go higher up the hill, there's even less topsoil, and so you graze animals there, sheep and goats and stuff, because you couldn't grow much else there. And then on the very top of the hill, you grow the city, because there's nothing that's going to grow up there. All the topsoil is washed down. It's just like rocks and stuff. So they build their city on the top of the hill. Why? So that they don't waste prime agricultural real estate by building a house on it. Okay. Also, it's nice because you can, if your house is on the very top of the hill, you can defend it from your enemies a little bit easier. So the vineyard is on a hill. Why? Because it has to be. That's agriculturally, that's kind of what is demanded. But it's very difficult because it's in subpar soil, and that's what we get in verse 2. He says, and then, by the way, my well-beloved, I think that's, he's talking about the sort of the beloved one there is the word in Hebrew. So I think this is definitely supposed to be Isaiah's sort of referring to the Lord, okay? That the Lord is the one doing this. That's the implication, and we'll get that later on. So he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it with the choicest vine. This is a very, very difficult process. You have to build fences or walls around it so that people don't come in and steal everything. You have to take out all the stones, which is just a huge project. A lot of people that have tried to do stuff like this in the desert, tried to garden in the desert, know that it's a huge project, gathering the stones out of it. And he planted it with the best vines. He built a watchtower in the middle of it, presumably so that you can see enemies coming and defend it. Presumably that's what that is. Made a wine press in it, and then waited for it to bring forth grapes. And then what does it do? It brings forth wild grapes. He's taken all this care of it, and it hasn't worked out. And it says, judge between me and my vineyard. What did I do wrong? And what else could I have done? I pulled the stones out. I built the best walls you can get, best tower you can get, best vines you can get, got the wine press ready, and it was worthless. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? That's almost an exact quotation from Jacob 5, from the other vineyard allegory we have. Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, it brought forth wild grapes. And that's the problem that God is having with these people. He's tried to take care of them so well. He's done everything he could possibly do. He's defended them from their enemies, and then they go wild on him. Right? And he goes, how did this happen? How could this possibly have happened when I took all this care to make sure that it worked out well? And so he's going to go on and talk about how this could have happened. So at this point, God has just kind of given up on the vineyard. He took all this care to make sure that they would come out perfectly, and then it was kind of worthless. So he just says, "Meh, I'm done with this. And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up. I will break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged. There shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry." And God's saying, listen, I'm done with this. I've taken care of you. You didn't produce at all what you were supposed to. So I'm going to take away the hedge thereof. So presumably these have a wall, sort of a stone wall. Obviously, you have to dig all the stones out of the ground. There's no shortage of stone for a wall for this, right? But then you also dig a hedge to keep a lot of the birds and animals out of it. So presumably you have both a hedge and a wall, a sort of thorny hedge, so that nothing can come in. And he says, nope, I'm done with that. I'm going to take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up. So presumably the animals and people can come in and just eat whatever they want of the grapes. And I will break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. So not only can the birds and the animals and people come in and eat stuff, but he's just going to break down the wall too. So the ox, while they're grazing, the animals while they're grazing just graze there too. Just trod the whole place down. It's not producing. It's worthless to them. And I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned nor digged. Giving up on it, right? But there shall come up briars and thorns. It's going to be a weed patch now, and the animals are just going to graze there. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. Because obviously here we get, this is God talking, right? So he can command the clouds that they don't rain on the place, right? And he says why he's doing this. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry. He's taken all this care with the house of Israel, but they haven't done anything. The house of Israel is the vineyard of the Lord of hosts, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. These nice vines that he was growing. But they're worthless to him now. They're not being righteous. He wanted, he said before, he says, he wanted grapes, they brought forth wild grapes. So he says, he wanted judgment, but behold oppression. This word judgment is probably, could be better translated as justice, sort of social justice in the courtroom, right? We were talking before about how people can't pay bribes. And because they can't pay bribes, they don't get justice in court. He's saying, I wanted justice in court, but behold, oppression, and actually the word maybe is better translated as slaughter. For righteousness, but behold, a cry, shrieking, probably is better the translation here. These are translated oddly because the words themselves are strange. It's a pun. He looked for judgment, but behold, oppression. The words there are almost exactly the same. They're just one word different in both cases. For judgment, but behold, oppression. For righteousness, but behold, a cry. So for mishvat, but behold, mishvach. For tzedkah, but behold, za'acha. So almost, they're just one letter off in both cases. And sort of show, they just didn't get it right. He wanted them to produce what they were supposed to produce, and they didn't, so God has sort of given up on them. And we'll see how that plays out in the next verses. You'll notice here that Isaiah is talking about a lot of the kind of issues that Israel is going to deal with, Israel and Judah are going to deal with very soon. The vineyard is going to get trampled because God is going to take down the walls, he's going to take down the hedges, and they're going to get trampled and eaten up. God has been protecting Israel from its enemies for a long time, and he's saying, to say that God is abandoning them completely, obviously God never does that, but he does sometimes have to temporarily abandon us because we don't obey. He can't bless us if we're not doing what he's telling us. So this is the warning to them, guys. If you guys don't shape up, I'm going to have to just let your enemies have you for a little while, and that's not going to be fun for you. And God, I think, has to do this for us too. He tries to get us to repent and figure our lives out, and he tries, and if we don't do it, he says, okay, I have to let bad things happen to you until you figure your life out. And that sounds harsh, that God would temporarily abandon people, but he kind of has to do it sometimes. He's always there for you. He's always there when you want to come back to him, but he can't force himself on us. He can't force himself on Israel and Judah, and he won't force himself on us today. And that's sad, but that's just kind of the way it is. And that obviously was the point of us coming to earth in the first place. So he's saying, yeah, I am going to have to leave for a while if you guys don't shape up. And he's saying, I wanted you guys to bring forth good fruit, but you didn't. Fruit meet for repentance, I think, is a good New Testament way of putting it. Wanted them to do that, but they didn't. He says, woe unto them that join house to house, till there can be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. In mine ear saith the Lord of hosts, of a truth, many houses shall be desolate, and great and fair cities without inhabitant. Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield 1 bath, and the seed of a homer shall yield an ephah. Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink. They continue until night, and wine inflame them. And the harp and the viol and the tabret and the pipe and wine are in their feasts, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. At this time, you weren't supposed to be able to sell your house or acquire more property. It was something that just passed on. You had fixed inheritances, basically, and they would pass on from one generation to the next so that everybody always had a place to live. Well, one thing that started to happen is that as you start to have people who were much richer than other people, and they would start to buy property, which is, for many years was a foreign concept, but they would sort of gobble up this property one way or the other, literally joining house to house, so there can be no place that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. They would literally, get adjacent properties, and then suddenly, some people, the really, really poor people, are left without any property at all. So he says, so there can be no place that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. That was considered a very heinous practice of the rich, sort of preying on the property of the poor just to make money. And now one interesting thing about this, in textual criticism, when they are trying to figure out what text is oldest or what text is most original, when you're trying to find an original text, okay, you go by a certain number of criterion. One of those are you go with the oldest text first, then you go with actually the shortest. If there's a variant, you go with the shortest variant. So if there are two verses, two slightly different versions of the same verse, and one is longer, you often go with the shorter one, because a lot of times the scribes would add things to explain later on. So you go with the oldest one, the shortest one, and oddly enough, the most complicated one, because the assumption is later scribes would try to clear stuff up that didn't make sense to them, that really only made sense in a more ancient context. And so, interestingly enough, we'll see that. We're seeing that right here in verse 8. We know that the Book of Mormons is the oldest one, but it's interesting that it also fulfills, in some cases, some of the other requirements. The King James and the Hebrew for this says, "Woe unto them that join house to house and field to field, till there can be no place that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth." The idea being that it's an explanation, right? Woe unto them that join house to house, which is to say, join field to field, until they have no place they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. So it's an interesting little caveat there that shows that, yeah, some of those rules for textual criticism are maybe not so far off. But here, the original is just, "Woe unto them that join house to house, till there can be no place that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth." The later addition, "field to field," may just be an explanation, probably, that some later guy put in, which explains that this is the process of them. Mostly it's an issue of fields, right? And they're not literally building houses next to each other. The idea was that house was kind of your personal property, so they're acquiring other people's personal properties, right? So that the poor are just left alone, isolated, without any place to live. It says, "In mine ears, saith the Lord of hosts." I think the "in mine ears" there is supposed to be an emphatic statement showing that God's really serious. Okay, "In mine ears, saith the Lord of hosts, of a truth, many houses shall be desolate, and great and fair cities without inhabitant." So God's saying, oh, you guys are going to persecute the poor so that they have to be by themselves? Well, that's not really going to work out for you. There are going to be entire cities that are going to be emptied now, with only a handful of people in them. All these great cities that you've built for yourself, you're trying to muscle out the poor to make these great houses and these awesome cities and stuff, they're going to be empty. They're going to be, because the Assyrians are going to come through and wipe everything out. So if you don't take care of social justice now, God's going to make sure that you don't enjoy the fruits of your labors. "Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield one bath, and the seed of a homer shall yield an ephah." This is a little bit confusing, but a bath there is literally just, that's the word in Hebrew, bath. It's just a liquid measurement, something like a quart, that kind of a thing. So basically he's saying, yeah, you're going to get 10 acres of grapevines or olive vineyards is going to yield you, you're going to get like a half a quart of olive oil or a half a quart of wine out of it. It's a ridiculously small yield. The seed of a homer, you got a giant bushel of seed to plant, yeah, you're going to get like a half a cup of seed out of that, right? He's explaining, that yeah, you guys are trying to do all this stuff. You're acquiring all this land. You're going to try to plant this land and make all this money. Yeah, it's not going to yield you anything, because it's going to be trampled by the Assyrians. "Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink that continue until night, and wine inflame them." Now they've got all this money that they're just drinking their grapes, right? They have all these extra vineyards. They're just drinking wine all day long because they have it, right? A lot of time, you would use wine to purify your water, and in fact, it talks about that later, that their wine is mixed with water. Well, you were supposed to actually do that to an extent so that you purify your drinking water with the alcohol. But these guys probably are just drinking it straight. They're just drinking and drinking all the time because they have it and they can. And they're just drunk all the time, partying, right? In verse 12, "The harp, the viol, the tabret, and the pipe, and wine are in their feasts, but they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands." They're just partying all the time, but they don't care about the Lord. They don't realize the Lord is the one that has made everything that they're enjoying. Right? God, literally the operation of God's hands has made the earth, made the ground that they're planting in, that they're growing their vineyards in, to drink wine all day long. So he's kind of showing to them the absurdity of their position and the absurdity of not taking care of the poor. But it goes on to say, therefore, my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge. Now we should talk here about the prophetic way of using the present tense, even when what you really mean is the future tense, or even past tense. Sometimes you're referring to the future. So therefore my people are gone into captivity, like it's in the past, even though it's in the future, although it's not really that near future. A lot of Isaiah scholars misanalyze, I think. They misunderstand parts of Isaiah because they kind of forget that the Assyrians took away a whole bunch of people from Israel and Judah. They took them away as slaves. And so there's a lot of discussion about captivity and return in Isaiah, and people say, well, that means that Isaiah has to be written so much later. It has to be written after the Babylonian captivity. But you're like, no, there was the Assyrian captivity too. And Isaiah very almost certainly is talking about that, because Isaiah is living around that time, right? So we shouldn't try to superimpose later time periods on Isaiah just kind of arbitrarily, which is what some people do. Now, it's pretty clear to me that Isaiah is referring to issues that have arisen because of the Assyrians, not the Babylonian captivity. So he's talking here about the very, very near future. Therefore, my people are gone into captivity by the Assyrians, because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure. And their glory and their multitude and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. And the mean man shall be brought down, and the mighty man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. It says, my people are going to go into captivity. Why? Because they have no knowledge. They don't understand. They don't have real knowledge of God. And I think that that's really key. They don't know. They don't apply what they know. They're enjoying all their kind of wayward lifestyle, but they just don't get it. Their honorable men are famished, their multitude dried up with thirst. You can read this two ways. Isaiah is just the champion of wordplay, and I think this is one case where he's doing that. Their honorable men are famished. That can also be their honorable ones are dead from famine. Subtle play on words there. And their multitude dried up by thirst. And in fact, when you look at it as a parallelism, it probably should be their honorable men are dead from famine, their multitude are dried up from thirst. And that word dead from famine is interesting. We'll see it in the next verse. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure. And you go, what? Hell has a mouth? That's kind of weird. Well, that word mote, honorable men are dead with famine. The word mote for dead, which really should be there in verse 13, is a reference to the Canaanite god Mot, who had this giant mouth, kind of like the Tasmanian devil, this giant mouth, and he just eats everything. Okay, it's the Canaanite god, which is the personification of death. He just swallows up everything, and nothing can escape. And so here he's taking that image that he's alluded to in verse 13. He's saying, well, hell, just like Mot, the Canaanite god Mot, who's the personification of death, swallows everything. Well, hell is doing the same thing, right? He's opened its mouth and just swallowed everything up. All their glory, all their multitude, their pomp, he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. A multitude there is kind of like riotousness almost. So their glory, their sort of riotousness, like riotously happy, like parties, and their pomp, all their arrogance, all their rejoicing, their sort of snooty rejoicing is almost, in some ways, some cases, the connotation of that word, shall descend into it. So just gonna swallow everything. You guys think that you're gonna enjoy this stuff forever? You're gonna live forever or something? No. Death is coming for you. Whether it's from the Assyrians or whether it's just natural causes, death is coming for you. All these parties and stuff, they're not going to matter. You're going to be dead. And the mean man shall be brought down, and the mighty man shall be humbled. Death is not is an equal opportunity employer, right? Death takes out everybody. And the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. Nobody escapes this. You guys think you're going to live forever and party and drink wine all the time? No. You guys are all going to die. And this is a theme that we've seen earlier on. All these really arrogant people who are just thinking they're so great and they're persecuting the poor because they've got all this money. Well, God's like, yeah, that's not going to end well for you guys. Even the very poor and the very great, they're all going to just end up dead. So all this money that you think makes you so much better than everybody else, it actually doesn't. In fact, some of the phraseology there is almost exactly the same as what we're getting early a few chapters ago, in chapters 1 and 2. And then in 16 he says, "But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. Then shall the lambs feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. Woe unto them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin as it were with a cart rope, that say, Let him make speed, hasten his work, that we may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come, that we may know it." So here he's saying, in 16, he's saying, listen, you guys think you're so great. God is going to be the one that's exalted, not you guys. God's going to be the one who's exalted in judgment, probably justice there, it may be a better translation. And God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. So God's going to be lifted up as the judge, and he's going to be holy, and he's going to be made more holy, which is the word sanctified there, made more holy by righteousness. Why? Because the bad ones have been wiped out, right? And only those that are left are left to praise the Lord. So he's going to be made more holy by their righteousness. And that word righteousness is almost like the way things should be. That's one of the connotations, which is interesting. And God's going to make sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be. Then shall the lambs feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. So, yeah, everything's going to be wiped out, and it's going to be so desolate that lambs are just going to graze as usual. You know, all these crazy revolutions have happened, but the lambs are just going to keep eating like they always have, just moseying around grazing. And the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. All these really nice places of these gluttons that have joined house to house and field to field and muscled out the poor and starved everybody. These great big estates they've created, strangers are just going to come in and start eating from them because nobody is going to be around. They're all going to be dead. There's nomads and foreigners are going to come in and just eat it. It says, "Woe to them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin as it were with a cart rope." So he's saying in this period, you know, when everything's kind of desolate and God is king, and he's judging everybody, and everything is great, but for the wicked it's not so great because it's desolate and they're dead, right? He says, how can you avoid this, right? What can you do to escape? And in 18 he says, "Woe to them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin as it were with a cart rope." And he's saying you guys are bound to sin. The imagery here is all about animals tied to their burdens, right? You pull iniquity behind you with cords of vanity, like an animal strapped to a cart, right? And sin as it were with a cart rope. It's like you're strapped to this burden of sin that you're dragging behind you. And then, strangely enough, you know, you're going so slow because you're dragging this sin and iniquity behind you. And then you say, "Let him make speed and hasten his work, that we may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come, that we may know it." You know, he's talking about all these prophecies that haven't happened yet. And presumably the people are saying, well, God better hurry up and these prophecies better come true, right? So we can see it. We want to know if what you were saying was right. And he said, well, it's ridiculous for you guys to talk about God being slow. You're the ones hauling sin behind you, right? Sort of trudging along through sin, even though you don't realize it right now. So he's just kind of making fun of the kind of ridiculousness of sort of the human timetable here, which we'll get to a little bit more. And that's something that he likes to emphasize, I think, the absurdity of a lot of this stuff. Of how can you possibly say that kind of a thing? And we see that a lot here. And he's going to do that in 20 through 22. He says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. They put darkness for light and light for darkness. They put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Just kind of these absurd things. "Woe unto the wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. Woe unto the mighty to drink wine and men of strength to mingle strong drink." You guys are just reversing everything that is the natural order of things. You're calling evil good, good evil, darkness for light, light for darkness, bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter. Even an idiot knows that this is not real, but you guys are pretending like it is. It says, "Woe unto the wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight." You guys are not really smart. You just think you are. You think you know so much better than God, but you just don't. You think that you can judge better, but clearly your judgments are ridiculous because you call light darkness and darkness light. You call bitter sweet and sweet bitter. So you think you can make these judgment calls, but clearly you can't, right? As we're saying in verse 21. "Woe unto the mighty to drink wine, and men of strength to mingle strong drink." You guys are just, you're getting drunk all the time. And this is kind of this idea of mighty to drink wine and men of strength to mingle strong drink. People who sort of can hold their liquor. They're proud of how much they can drink without getting drunk, kind of thing. And he's like, "Really? Are you guys kidding me?" The only way that a condition like that can exist is if you guys are just utterly gluttonous and you're not taking care of the poor, right? How can you afford to have that much alcohol, right? You shouldn't be able to. And obviously, binge drinking has never been a great idea. But he's just saying, you guys, this is utterly absurd. And he goes on to talk about kind of once again, the absurdity of all of this. "Who justify the wicked for reward and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. Therefore as the flame devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, their root shall be rottenness, and their blossom shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel." And that's a very strong statement. He's saying, you guys are turning everything on its head. Evil good, good evil, light darkness, bitter sweet. You give justice to the wicked because he can pay you, right? You justify the wicked for reward. You give justice to the wicked for a bribe, is basically what he's saying, and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. You make the righteous look like they're not righteous in court. And he says, because of this, you guys are going to be just like the vineyard. We see it in verse 24. "Therefore as the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, their root shall be rottenness, and their blossom shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel." I don't know if any of you have ever seen this in an agricultural setting. I lived in Yuma, Arizona for a while, and when you're driving down the freeway, after they harvest everything, they just light the fields on fire. And so I remember driving down the freeway and just seeing this huge cloud of black smoke. I thought it was Armageddon. What's going on? Well, no, they just do this every year. They just burn the fields after they're done. What kind of a way of getting all the weeds out of the way for the next year, honestly. They just burn it all. And God's saying, listen, just like the vineyard, I trampled it down. How do you think you got rid of the trees? You lit it up, right? And that's what he's saying here. Yeah, you guys are worthless, so I'm going to burn you down just like the vineyard got burned down. As the fire devoureth the stubble, the extra stuff in the field, and the flame consumeth the chaff. So the stubble is just the extra stuff in the field, just the little tiny bits of straw after you harvest, right? Because you cut it off with a sickle close to the ground. So you have little bits of stubble just right there, just above the ground, and you just burn it because there's nothing you can do with it. And the flame consumeth the chaff. The chaff is the extra part that surrounds the grain. You think of grains of wheat. There's little tiny bits of chaff, straw kind of stuff that surrounds that, and you sort of toss it up in the air and let the wind blow the chaff away. But it's really worthless. It's worthless, so you just light it on fire. So he says, in the same way, you guys are going to be just like that. It says, their root shall be rottenness, and their blossoms shall go up as dust. So just like the flame burns through all this stuff, you guys are not producing. Your root is rotten, and your blossoms are they just blow away. That's the implication of that word. Your blossoms just blow away. So you're stubble. You're worthless. I'm going to burn you up with everything else. Right? This is talking about waste, and he's saying, just like agricultural waste, you guys are just like that because you're not producing, right? And why? Because they've cast away the law of the Lord of hosts and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. You aren't keeping the commandments. God can't bless you. It's not that God hates us. It's not that he loves to punish us. It's just that he cannot bless us if we're doing this. And that applies just as much today as it did then. We can see here actually an example of stubble field. You can see in the picture there, it's just they're burning the stubble. It's just a little tiny bit above the ground after you've harvested everything. It's totally worthless, and like I said, you burn it so that it kills the weed seeds and gets rid of the weeds for the next year. Also, it does help to put some nutrients back in the soil. And then also the same thing with the chaff. You can see the picture of the chaff there. It's just the extra that was supposed to go around the grain. It just is totally worthless. And God's saying, listen, I'm going to, just like this stuff gets torched, I'm going to torch you guys, basically. I'm going to allow the Syrians to come in and take you out if you don't keep the commandments. And this is something that is kind of painful for us, I think, obviously, to think about, that God is allowing this to happen to them. But you have to realize that God is allowing this to happen to them. God is going to... Isaiah talks a lot about God smiting Israel and stuff like that, and that's true, but it's more like God is not protecting them anymore because he can't really, right? God is sort of keeping the chaos at bay, keeping their enemies from destroying them, but at times he can't do that because they're not obedient. He tries and he tries and he tries, but after a while he just has to let their enemies come and get them. And so that's what it talks about. God is smiting them, and but you have to understand that that's what that means, is he's allowing these things to happen to them. In verse 25, it says, therefore is the anger of the Lord kindled against his people, and he hath stretched forth his hand against them, and hath smitten them. And the hills did tremble, and their carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. And he will lift up an ensign to the nations from far, and will hiss unto them from the ends of the earth. And behold, they shall come with speed swiftly. None shall be weary, nor stumble among them. None shall slumber nor sleep, neither shall the girdle of their loins be loosed, nor the latchet of their shoes be broken. So Isaiah is saying, listen, the anger of the Lord is kindled against his people. He's not happy. And he stretched forth his hand against them to hit them, right? He has smitten them. He stretched forth his hand and smacked them. And the hills did tremble, and their carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. This is even worse than what it looks like in the King James and in the Book of Mormon. The hills that tremble are earthquakes, and their dead bodies are torn in the midst of the streets, but also they're just swept up. There's so many dead people, they're literally having to sweep up these dead bodies out of the streets, okay? It's a very painful image. It says, for all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still, right? So he's saying he's stretched forth his hand and smitten them, and even after all this, even when they're hauling away bodies from the streets, he's still going to smite them. His anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. The word but there can be translated as but can also be and. For all this his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. And it just said he's smitten them. He stretched out his hand and smitten them, and he's still smiting them. However, Ann Matson would be very upset with me if I were remiss to note that the Book of Mormon guys take this phrase and kind of turn it on its head. And Isaiah, I think, does in some cases mean both of these things. For all this his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still, right? He's going to keep smacking you. But also, In the Book of Mormon, there's a lot of discussion about arms of mercy, right? Merciful arm, sort of clasped in the arms of his love, right? There's a lot of stuff about the loving arm of the Lord. So what's going on with that compared to this? I think that mostly this means, yeah, God is still just going to keep smacking it, right? But I think the ambiguity of the and or but there, I think it can mean at times his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Kind of the merciful arm is also stretched out, right? Usually it means, yeah, God's just going to keep hitting you. But on a few, I think that we should realize the Book of Mormon guys take this image of an angry God with his arm stretched out to hit you and says, well, but that's not always the case. God also is standing with open arms to receive us if we come back to him. I don't know if Isaiah necessarily meant that in this case, but the Book of Mormon guys definitely take that and run with it, and I really like that idea. That yes, sometimes God's arm is used to smack you upside the head, but sometimes God's arms are open to us to embrace us when we return to him. And I think that's very important to remember in the context of Isaiah, who is very brutal against these guys. He doesn't mince words. I think it's important to remember that, yes, things are going to be bad, but God is going to help us to come back again. And it's time for us to talk about something called double coding. Not double coating, double coding with a D. It's something from architecture where architects would build buildings that were functional and that the public could appreciate, but they would also do little strange things with them that only other architects would notice, as a way to sort of talk to two audiences at once. The general public sees the building and they go, oh, that's a great building. But then other architects are like, oh, that's cool, he did that special thing right there, right? So you're able to talk to two audiences at the same time. There's a guy I know in British Columbia who's associated this idea with the Gospels, and I liked it so much, I adopted it. I think that Isaiah is doing the same thing here. Because this is very clearly, he's continuing here to just talk about what's going to happen, all these bad things that are going to happen to Israel, right? He'll lift up an ensign to the nations from far and will hiss to them to the ends of the earth. So, lift up an ensign to the Gentiles, really. Lift up a signal for the Gentiles to rally around, so everyone, and he'll whistle for them, hiss unto them, whistle for them, unto them from the ends of the earth. That's the idea, whistle for them. And they're all just going to come super fast. They're not going to be weary. They're not going to stumble. They're just going to charge in on Israel, and they're going to blow them away. They're not going to slumber or sleep. They're not going to, they're not going to trip over their shoes. They're just going to come in and wipe out Israel. Okay, so because ensign, that's a military banner. He's going to lift up a military banner, and will whistle for them from the end of the earth. Right? They're going to come from all over. And they're just going to charge in. They're going to come with speed swiftly. None shall be weary nor stumble among them. They're just going to come in and wipe out Israel. None shall slumber or sleep. Neither shall the girdle of their loins be loosed, nor the latchet of their shoes broken. That's a kind of a strange thing there. Girding your loins. You used to have these long robes, but it's very hard to run or fight in these long robes. So what you do is you pull up the robes and kind of tuck it in your belt, kind of a thing. There's a special way of wrapping it so that your kind of robes become almost like little pants, so you can run around and fight better. So it says there, the loins that they've girded, it's not going to fall down, and the fastenings on their sandals are not going to break. So they're just going to come in and hit the Israelites as hard as they possibly can, right? But it's very clear from the rest of the chapter that's what he's talking about. But this may be an example of double coding. He's talking about the Israelites getting wiped out, but he may also be referring to something else. Because notice the strange phrase, he will hiss unto them from the end of the earth. Why does he need to hiss unto them from the end of the earth? They're right there. They're Israel's neighbors are the ones that are going to wipe them out. It's not the end of the earth. Right? So what is he talking about? So at the time when people are hearing this, they're saying, oh yeah, he's going to call in all our neighbors and they're going to wipe us out. And that's true. But eventually, one day, he's going to call to them, the Gentiles, from the ends of the earth. And they'll come with speed swiftly. And in that case, I think he's talking about the gathering. Right? That yes, even though right now he's talking about them getting wiped out, they're going to be scattered among the Gentiles, and they and the Gentiles are going to come back from the ends of the earth. When you look at some of the earliest converts, in fact, a lot of people in the church today come from Norway and Scandinavia. As far north as you can get, the end of the earth, literally. I mean, Norway. It doesn't get farther north than that and still be on actual land, at least in Europe. And a lot of people in the church today are related to these Scandinavian converts. So literally, he's calling to them the Gentiles from the end of the earth. And actually, a lot of the early converts were Maori converts from New Zealand. So literally, opposite ends of the earth. He's calling to them from the ends of the earth, right? And so I think this, like I said, an example of double coding. He's clearly just talking about he's going to call in Israel's enemies. They're going to come in and wipe everybody out. But he's also alluding to another, much more future event, when the Gentiles are going to come into the church from the ends of the earth. Isaiah does this consistently, and so we'll talk about that when we get to it. But this is, like I said, an example of double coding. He has to talk about stuff that makes sense in his own time, right? And so this makes definite sense in the context of Assyria. But he's also talking to a very small part of his audience that knows the scriptures and prophecies well enough to know that someday there's going to be a gathering. A very small part of his audience is going to be up on the scriptures probably well enough, stuff like the book of Moses, to know that someday this kind of thing is going to happen. And so he's able to talk to two audiences at once. Okay, so that verse is talking about that. And then he goes back, they're going to just come in and wipe out everybody. But you have to realize he sometimes addresses two audiences at the same time. And we'll get some more double coding, actually, as we go through here just in the next few verses. There's a great conference talk I read relating some of this stuff. So 28, it says, whose arrows shall be sharp and all their bows bent, and their horses' hooves shall be counted like flint, and their wheels like a whirlwind, and their roaring like a lion. They shall roar like young lions, yea, they shall roar and take hold of the prey, and shall carry away safe, and none shall deliver. And in that day they shall roar against them like the roaring of the sea. If they look into the land, behold, darkness and sorrow, and the light is darkened in the heavens thereof. Very, very ominous. Whose arrows shall be sharp, and all their bows bent, and their horses' hooves shall be counted like flint. That, like flint, the word there is very, very thin or sharp. The idea being they're just going to trample them, right? Their horses' flint. They used to make arrowheads a lot of times out of flint. Sometimes they used harder things, but a lot of times also they used flint. So their horses' hooves are going to be just like arrows, just pounding into people, right? I mean, it's very kind of grotesque image he's talking about. And their wheels like a whirlwind. They're roaring like a lion. They're just going to come in and wipe everybody out. They shall roar like... and they shall roar like young lions, yea, they shall roar and lay hold of the prey, and shall carry away safe, and none shall deliver. They're just going to fall upon Israel and Judah and carry them away, and no one is going to be able to help them. Like young lions, I think, is the idea that they're very sort of active and energetic, not like older lions. They're very kind of young and feisty and willing to sort of prove themselves and just blow everybody away, right? They shall roar and lay hold of the prey, right? You get the lions a lot of times would get prey and then roar as a way of like showing that everyone should stay away from their kill, and then they hauled away by themselves, and nothing can come and take the prey away from the lion after he's gotten it. That's the idea. Nothing is going to save you. If you don't repent now, nothing is going to save you. And in that day they shall roar against them like the roaring of the sea. And if they look unto the land, behold, darkness and sorrow, and the light is darkened in the heavens thereof. It's almost going to be like the ocean is coming in on these guys, like a tidal wave. And if they look all over the land, onto the land is maybe not right in this case. The water imagery is unfortunate there, but if you look, you can scan the land. That's probably better translated as scan the countryside. And all you see is darkness and sorrow, and the light in the heavens is darkened. So just everything is going to be desolate. The Assyrians are going to come in, wipe everybody out, and that's going to be that. But this in 28, it might be an example of double coding. It might just be this guy in conference, kind of applying this to his own time. But I thought it was interesting. He talked about their horses' hooves counted like flint, and their wheels like a whirlwind, and their roaring like a lion. Obviously, this is the Assyrians coming in to wipe everybody out, but also it might be double coding for missionary work. We were just talking about the gathering briefly a few verses ago, and I read a talk that said that horses' hooves counted like flint. A lot of times on old railroads, you would see sparks coming along as the railroad was rolling, right? Like flint does. Their wheels like a whirlwind, just like you have old airplanes had rotors, that like a whirlwind, to get people to their destinations. They're roaring like a lion, like car engines, kind of interesting. I don't know if Isaiah was thinking of that. He might not have been, of course, but it might be also an example of double coding. We know that Isaiah is a visionary guy. He's seeing lots of visions, and this might be a nod by Isaiah to missionary work during the Restoration. Now, obviously, it has to make sense to the people he's talking to, so clearly he's talking about the Assyrians coming in and wiping everybody out. But this also may be an allusion to future events. And like I said, we'll see that kind of thing a lot in Isaiah. This is a little bit of a downer chapter here. We will get to some of the better stuff, more optimistic stuff with Isaiah. But I think it's important to know all these things, these bad things that are happening to Israel and Judah, he's blaming it on social justice. They're not taking care of the poor, and so this is what's going to happen to them. They just kind of become obsessed with money and joining house to house and getting drunk all the time. And Isaiah is saying, listen, your big estates and your alcohol and your money aren't going to do you a lick of good. Men die the same. Doesn't matter how much or how little money you have. Everybody dies the same. And it's kind of a not so optimistic conclusion, but I think it's important to remember. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Doesn't matter how great you think you are. Your body's going to get hauled out of the road just like everybody else's. Rich, poor, black, white, bond, free, male, female. Everybody's the same. And I think that Isaiah is trying to remind them of that. They need to remember that, or God's going to remind them forcefully. So that's the end of that very long chapter, and we'll do chapter 6 next time, and we'll see you guys later.